Self-image as others. This video discussion is on the concept of everyone is you pushed out, one of the most popular concepts from Neville Goddard, and definitely one of my most favorite ideas that I ever instilled as far as deeper understanding goes, even recognizing that I can understand this even more through practice and reflection to see how consciousness and the contents of consciousness is externalized as others, how we relate to others, how we believe others relate to us, which is a representation of what we call the self-image, which is also what we work on, which is changing the self-image, or more accurately put, becoming the true self or highest version of ourself. Now, I'm going further into this discussion because I've had a number of individuals who I do business with reach out to me and on our conversations, because they watch my videos, say that they want to integrate this into their teams, into their relationships, into how they deal with their clients, their vendors, their staff, etc. And this brought me great joy because from the journey of being involved with management consulting and deeply reflecting upon the different experiences that we all have within the realm of business, I recognize that whoever interprets their team, their vendor, their client is actually interpreting themselves reflected in who they are dealing with. Now, this is true when it comes to everybody that we're dealing with. So the concept of self, the self-image, is what is being revealed in how we interpret others, as well as how we interpret ourselves. And through working with our imagination and identifying with the concept of self, that is what we would call the true self, the highest version of ourselves, and we'll talk about this. This is what is transforming and self-persuading us. And this is done primarily through what we imagine, which can be represented in 5 sensory experience in the imagination. Watch the video I did on NLP submodalities and accessing states via the imagination, as well as how we navigate this outer world, the environment, and how we relate to it, again, built on the foundation of the concept of self, as well as one of my favorite, inner conversations, inner dialogue. So we're going to be focusing more on inner dialogue and the naturalness of inner conversation to further affirm the ideal self-image, so that it translates, so it externalizes as others who represent that self-image in our team, our clients, our vendors, everybody else that we deal with on the entrepreneurial journey or in life in general. So the idea is the naturalness of the ideal self-image. So we have in our mind's eye the person that we aspire to be, who experiences the kind of success or the kind of results or the kind of life experiences that we want to have. We have the ability to imagine this in our mind's eye. As we dwell in our imagination on this ideal, interacting with others and affirming that others interact with us from how we imagine them to interact with us, while facilitating inner conversations with them in our imagination, we will observe as they externalize or represent or even reveal those exact or similar conversations that represent that self-image that we are further affirming in our subconscious mind. So to understand this further, let's discuss consciousness. Neville says, "That I may not be misunderstood, let me again lay the foundation of this principle. Consciousness is the one and only reality. We are incapable of seeing other than the contents of our own consciousness." So, as mentioned, we are interpreting others, and we may believe that we understand another, but we have to also represent and understand that each person is an infinite expression of the infinite mind. They are essentially a conduit of expression of the infinite mind. It is far easier to interpret how we relate to them and represent them in our own consciousness of how we believe them to be. And this will bring a greater degree of peace and harmony in the relationship because you're realizing that the power is within. When working with this concept here, what we're really doing is figuring out how we relate to the other person, which is distinct. Without consciousness, there would be nothing to experience form. So the contents of our consciousness, our inner dialogue, what we imagine, our belief systems, what we believe, our assumptions, are represented in our relationships with others. How we relate to ourselves and how we relate to others. That's the form. The form is this outer world. It has been formed in this outer world. The goal is to recognize that that's the source of this. Now, we have been receiving impressions from the outer world, which is impressing on the subconscious mind, and perhaps forming a self-image which we would call not the ideal self-image or disempowering self-image or a prior self-image in which we experience disharmony with the other person. Thus, what we want to do is focus on changing the contents of our own consciousness. Now, as mentioned also, that the consciousness of another, which is also connected to the infinite consciousness, which is actually one consciousness, is unlimited. Unlimited. But one of the things that we've been talking about when we have been discussing the concept of NLP frame control is that if we represent the true attributes of love, and I discussed some of those attributes in the video I released a couple of videos ago, I'll put a link in the description, then we'll recognize that others will externalize those representations of love. Because that's where we are moving to. We all want to bring forth our ideal version of ourselves, our true self, and others also, whether they say it or not, they want to bring forth their ideal version of themselves. Some might want to do it faster, some want to do it slower. It's the nature of things. And if you have the ability to represent your inner conversation in a way that speaks to the ideal attribute in the other person, for example, in the world of business, if you're dealing with a team, the goal is to see the team in a way that they want to see themselves. So the way to do this is to ask them, what kind of goals, aspirations, and ideals do they have? And connect it to your own goals and ideals and the vision of the company. And then in your mind's eye, have a conversation with them and represent them on a regular basis as already being who they want to be and who you want to see them be, which is what they want to be as well, by the inner dialogue. For example, let's say a team member does not perform a role in the ideal way. Instead of shaming them and blaming them, you go into your mind's eye and recognize that they are on the learning journey. And there's going to be a point where they're going to represent the ideal behavioral example or transformational change that is going to create harmony in the business. And what you'll notice is that you'll have an inner dialogue with them in your imagination. Now, this inner dialogue in your imagination could externalize as conversation with them, or you'll notice that their behaviors change. How they perform will change. Now, if you get a third party to go and have a conversation with them, and the third party recognizes that their performance has been getting better, they'll start to say things that will reveal that they were the cause of that, as they came up with their own ideas of how to solve it. As well as they may say, well, you, as in their leader, created a very nurturing and inspiring environment for them. They feel that you understand them. Now, this would be true because, again, you are interpreting all this from your own consciousness. You are representing how you believe reality to work, and it is externalizing as the conversation with the third party's interpretation as well as the conversation with your team member. Knowing that consciousness is all-encompassing, everything, all of it, externalized here, found its origins from within. Now, this is the paradigm. For some of us, this might be considered an extreme paradigm because we're not used to this. But the more we can embrace this and adopt it and work with it, we will become that which we aspire to be from a place of flow and love, as well as understanding others, thus further amplifying the power of the understanding that this is all done through our own concept of self. All of this is about changing the concept of self. Also, consciousness, although invisible, is the source of how we represent ourselves. So it's invisible. You can imagine yourself to be whatever way you want. You can imagine yourself to be loving or destructive. It'll play out as outer world theater. Although a lot of times we subconsciously imagine ourselves to be destructive and then play out as theater, and we might not know that because we have not brought in conscious awareness on the unconscious attributes of the self-image that are playing out in theater. So we observe our behaviors. We observe how other people relate to us. We observe how we relate to others. And we change how we believe and assume them to be. We change how we believe and we assume ourselves to be. And we represent them in our mind's eye via inner conversation and imaginary seeing them as the ideal. He says, what I tried to tell you was this. We become what we contemplate. So essentially, we're contemplating all day long. We're imagining all day long. And what has been externalized in respects to this particular philosophy of Neville is the contents of our consciousness. Now he says, for it is the nature of love, as it is the nature of hate, to change us into the likeness of that which we contemplate. So it will be represented on the outer world's screen of space in how we relate to others. Now what we want to do is represent the self-image that is in ideal to the nature of love, so that what we have on the journey in our experiences with others is reflected as them playing out the theater of love. So you have a harmonious journey to the destination. So if it's the entrepreneurial success and you've got a team, then what you'll notice, more so each day, they will be more harmonious to the destination of the business success. So we are self-persuaded by inner love. As James Allen puts it, the soul attracts that which it secretly harbors, that which it loves. So what we're looking to do is identify what we truly love. And this is why we work with the Ikigai model in creating an entrepreneurial business or choosing a career or profession, which essentially is doing what you love to do. On this journey, what we really want to identify is what we love to do. Those are the things that is going to bring forth flow. It's going to bring us joy. It's going to bring us bliss. Those are the things that we can truly commit to in our imagination. We can imagine ourselves and see ourselves accomplishing that which we love, actively so. And we want to encourage that and affirm that in our consciousness. We want our consciousness, to the best of our ability, saturated by thoughts of what we love. Now, because most of us invest 8, 10, sometimes even more hours a day in our job or in our business, it's important then to do the job or the business from a place of love. Learn how to love the attributes of it, or actually do the things that you know you love, which is the same thing. Although learning how to love would mean changing our interpretation. Now, in relation to what we were discussing about dealing with others in teams, if these were the team members that we selected to move forward towards the business success, then we want to create a harmonious journey on the way to the business success, which represents love, the nature of love. So this is where we find the accurate interpretations of how we see them, such as the example that I gave earlier, which resembles love, benefit for you and benefit for them. And they feel it and you feel it because it is true love, externalized. Now, from that, you could say you learn how to love, but really what's happening is you are revealing what you truly love. That's the key distinction. And we are self-persuaded by inner love. So as I discussed in a couple of videos ago when we discussed frame control, we spoke about certain attributes, power, presence, and warmth, which was discussed from Olivia Fox-Cabane's book, the charisma myth. Now, there was some attributes that I put in there, some sub-attributes, which I uncovered through my journey of studying leadership. All those attributes represent love. Now, as you identify with those attributes of how you see yourself, as well as carry yourself from those attributes, the current self-image becomes the higher self-image, the true self-image. What you'll then notice is you'll be authentically self-persuaded. And the idea of frame control then becomes natural. So it's not, I'm trying to get the frame. I'm trying to get someone to do this. It is, I am this. This is who I embody. This is who I truly am. That becomes saturated in our consciousness, and it externalizes as, and then you can even ask the third party, who has the frame in this conversation? They'll say, you have the frame. But what is really going on within is you're not trying to get the frame. You're not trying to persuade the other person. Now, this is very deep consciousness level stuff that we're talking about, which is beyond tactical ways of doing things. This is deep identity level change. As you continue to represent it, and the way we represent it is through our inner conversations, carrying on inner conversations that represent love towards all that we relate to. Number two is the environments that we choose to be in, because the environments that represent love, fun, bliss, and joy also further affirm that state of mind, the state of mind of the ideal self. Now, that ideal state of mind or that self-image, when affirmed, either through inner dialogue, through affirmation, through self-talk, or through being in environments that encourage that self-image, eventually become what we traditionally refer to as the person's self-image. So it's like the previous self-image was replaced through this process with the ideal self-image. You know that you have become who you are really meant to be. And this is what I mean by we are self-persuaded by inner love. That which we truly want to be, who we truly aspire to live from, which is the ideal self-image, is actually the representation of authentic self-persuasion. So we don't have to fake it. We want to be that which we truly want to be. Now, he states, we radiate the world that surrounds us by the intensity of our imagination and feeling. So what we're talking about intensity, we're not talking about force. We're talking about being, representing the ideal self-image. He says, but in this third dimensional world of ours, time beats slowly. And so we do not always observe the relationship of the visible world to our inner nature. So this is where we practice cause and effect reflection. It is the interpretation as you represent the ideal self-image, that which you love, how you see yourself to be, the inner conversations that you have. And observe, sometimes radically so or gradually so, your outer world is externalizing it through how people relate to you, through your behaviors, through your emotional integration, which means you will accurately emotionally integrate with it rather than being fight or flight. What we'll notice is that things change fast and things can change slow, depending on what it is. And the key is to recognize this change each and every day. How you relate to others, how others relate to you, your behaviors, how you integrate with your environments, what you spontaneously decide to do all of a sudden, how you're behaving differently, but more accurately put, how you are relating to this outer world in reflection to that self-image, which you have been embodying through your inner conversations, through what you affirm, through maintaining the ideal state of mind, by selecting the environments and dwelling in the environments and doing the things that bring forth a higher degree of love, bliss, and flow. Through doing this, the gradual changes or sometimes the radical changes, and depending on your ability to relate and understand yourself and know yourself, you can experience radical changes often. This is done through the journey of understanding yourself. And it is really understanding what you truly love. This is really what it comes down to. And this is why I believe in Steve Jobs' commencement speech. He said, follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you want to become. Everything else is secondary. And he was saying doing what you love to do. So your heart and intuition is going to guide you to what you love. It's going to reveal what you love, what brings you into flow, what brings you into joy and bliss. And as you continue to nurture, honor, and do those things, your intuition will guide you to externalizing what you desire. And living in and from that perspective can be challenging to somebody who has been overwhelmed by what we call mental chatter, which is essentially denial of living the true self. So this journey is about identifying the true self, bringing forth what you desire, living in and from the true self, and then also externalizing others who also reveal within themselves the true self and represent it through your own being, because no one can change but self. And the outer world is an externalization, or as he puts it, everyone is you pushed out. He says, you and I can contemplate an ideal and become it by falling in love with it. So this is what we're doing. We imagine ourselves to be a certain way, and we fall in love with it by prioritizing it, making it a priority. He says, on the other hand, we can contemplate something that we dislike, and by condemning it, we will become it. So this is interesting. It works both ways. What we love is represented in how we relate to others and how others relate to us. And what we condemn is also represented in others, how we relate to them and how they relate to us. So we want to remember, as he stated here, so that I may not be misunderstood, let me again lay the foundation of this principle. Consciousness is the one and only reality. We are incapable of seeing other than the contents of our own consciousness. So it is the assumption that no one to change but self. We may assume others to be a certain way, but we want to accurately assume by recognizing that perhaps the way we're assuming them to be, which would be disempowering, is based on our own assumptions via our own consciousness, and that's where the change occurs. So this is a high level of empowerment way of navigating reality. And you've heard me mention this on the last few videos. We are both the molder and the interpreter of reality. Reality is both inspiring and revealing to us at the same time. So let's talk about now, we've talked about the naturalness of the ideal self-image, and more so, we discussed this over the videos, further dimensionalizing it. Now, this outer world reveals the degree of self-persuasion that we have to the self-image, or the ideal self-image, by what is being revealed in how we interact with others. So he says here, I may not like what I have just heard, that I must try to turn to my own consciousness as to the only reality, the only foundation on which all phenomena can be explained. It was easier living when I could blame another. It was much easier living when I could blame society for my ills or point a finger across the sea and blame another nation. It was easier living when I could blame the weather for the way I feel. Now, the reason why he says it was easier is because it's like we don't go into the source of it and make the changes within, because for some of us, we don't want to confront that or recognize that we are the source of it, because in all fairness, we weren't taught these kinds of principles as we go through life to the degree that Neville discusses it. And as we accept the responsibility more and more so each day for how we relate to others, and then go and change the concept of self that relates with others, as well as the inner conversations of how we interpret, imagine ourselves to relate with others, and observe the changes, that becomes easier, and we begin to live more from that perspective. Now, this translates into success because so much of the entrepreneurial journey or the career path, or just about anything, if you work with the ikigai, doing what you love to do, what the world needs, what you're good at, what you can get paid for, is going to involve relating with others. As mentioned, team members, vendors, clients, staff. It's going to be so many different types of relationships that you're going to encounter on your journey to bring forth that success. It's part of a big theatrical story to the fulfillment. and you're relating with each other. So the degree that you can relate from a perspective of love is going to be represented, and your ability to work with this power, the law from within, is going to be represented. And it's really through saturating the consciousness with this kind of information from the same perspective or multiple different perspectives. As we talked about in the video where I discussed paradigm, how do we change the paradigm? The same kind of information through repetition that further affirms the new paradigm, or the same kind of information from many different perspectives that further affirms the new paradigm. And so what we're adopting here is the paradigm of harmonious journey to the fulfillment of what we desire to experience in relation to others. So further emphasizing, there is a greater I, which is deeper than the past self, or attributes of the current self that may represent the past self. So this is how we do it on the journey. Day to day, attributes of the current self or the past self, or you could say just current self, the current self-image, is being represented in how we relate to others, our experiences that we have with them. And there's a greater I, a higher self, a truer self, a higher version of yourself. And you can imagine yourself interacting with those same people from the perspective of that higher self. You can believe an inner dialogue, and you can do this throughout the day or at certain times of the day, that you see them, those that you interact with, from a place of love, the attributes of love, involved with loving deals, harmonious theater that plays out in your business, whatever it is, whether it's how you relate with your team, your vendors, or prospects or clients, or business partners, or anyone. You can believe them to be that way. That is actually affirming this greater I, as we discussed in the video where we talked about frame control representing love. So feelings of love and bliss actually bring forth the greater I. So selecting environments and putting yourself in scenarios that bring forth the feeling of love and bliss further affirms and brings forth this greater I, which also represents certain inner dialogue and inner conversation that seems to spring forth. Now, many of you have experienced this because I brought this up a few times. If you're in a certain state of mind, a negative state of mind, notice how you'll have a negative inner dialogue with people in your life. And probably even externalized negative dialogue, as in a conflict with another person that is not moving the objective forward, but rather a place to create unnecessary complexity and convolution. Now, notice that when you identify with a loving state of mind, or you're in a loving mood, then your inner dialogues with people, how you imagine people to be, represent that inner dialogue, as well as your conversations with others also represent that inner dialogue. So that's why maintaining it and representing it as much as you can each day further affirms that state of mind and becomes the current identity, which actually also represents the greater I, because the greater I is also represented as love. So again, what we are looking at as we experience our journey, our day-to-day, is to find within where we are the cause via our assumptions, beliefs, and interpretations. So he says, but to tell me that I'm the cause of all that happens to me, that I am forever molding my world in harmony with my inner nature, this is more than a man is willing to accept, at least in the beginning. But as we continue on this journey of personal development and self-realization, we realize that this is actually the ideal way to be, because we observe the results as we continue on this journey. And it becomes easier and easier because there's a part of us that thought this was challenging, and maybe that was the case for a long period of time. But as we continue to work with this and produce the results with it, which is essentially the essence of all personal development information, we will see that this is actually an ideal way to be, to take the responsibility from within, as referred to as internal locus of control, more so each day. So when man fully understands this, he knows that public opinion does not matter, for men only tell him who he is. So again, this can appear as a paradigm shift. He's saying that what other people are communicating is really, again, if we use the understanding of how consciousness works, only interpreted by ourselves from within. We can change the interpretation of those opinions. We can find the validity behind it, and we can let go or release the elements of that opinion that are not valid. Or we find ourselves actually forming an accurate assumption within in which we interpret them a certain way, in which then the communication goes in a certain way that we call love, a loving communication, harmonious relationship. The behavior of men constantly tell me who I have conceived myself to be. So again, it comes down to changing the concept of self and recognizing that the world, this outer world, reflects the concept of self and the degree of self-persuasion that we have to the ideal self-image, which is further affirmed by our inner dialogue, by our environments, by what we are doing every single day, and how we are interpreting what we're doing every single day, and the kind of information that we're consuming every single day, and how we are interpreting that information every single day. And we have the power to change all of these attributes and relate the attributes to the self-image that we call the ideal self-image. Just as we have formed behaviors and assumptions of how we believe ourselves to be through repetition of the same information or the same information from different perspectives, we could do it internally via our imagination. So let's talk about further discussion into the attributes of true self, of the true self, which represents love. He says we must begin to take life consciously, for the solution of all problems just lies in this. The second man, the Lord from heaven in all of us, is trying to become self-conscious in the body, so that he may be about his Father's business. What are his labors? To imitate his Father, to become the master of the Word, master of his inner talking, that he may mold this world of ours into a likeness with the kingdom of love. So David Hawkins in Power versus Force describes love from two interesting perspectives. Let's reflect upon these quotes and discuss it further. He says, love as depicted in the mass media is not what this level is about. Now he's talking about level 500 in the consciousness scale, and I recommend reading Power versus Force. What the world generally refers to as love is an intense emotional condition combining physical attraction, possessiveness, control, addiction, eroticism, and novelty. It's usually fragile and fluctuating, waxing and waning with varying conditions. Now, he says love that is unconditional, changing, and permanent, that's the kind of love we're looking to embody in ourselves through our inner assumptions, beliefs, and interpretation of ourselves in relation to our goal, our vision, in relation to those that we relate with and their vision, and so that we are unmoved. We represent, and we would call that having frame control, because that frame represents the deep frame of love, a solid frame of love that is unmovable, unconditional, unchanging, and permanent. Now we become like this more so each day. So this is a journey, higher degrees of self-realization, higher degrees of bringing forth the true self and living the true self more so each day. He says it doesn't fluctuate. Its source is independent on external factors. Loving is a state of being. It is a forgiving, nurturing, and supportive way of relating to the world. So here are the clues. Forgiving, nurturing, and supportive way of relating to others. What is our interpretation of the people that we relate to each day? Is it from these perspectives? What if we change how we imagine them to be and identify it with these perspectives? Well, when we do it, they change because they, at their true self, are also from a state of love, which also represents forgiving, nurturing, and supportive way of relating to the world. So what we're doing is we are awakening it in ourselves, and it looks like we are awakening those attributes in them, that which they truly desire to be. Now, when we say this takes a lot of confidence and self-esteem, what we're really referring to is as we continue to maintain this, the self-confidence and self-esteem is obvious and natural. So when you show up and represent a certain state of mind, and because of the affirmation of that state of mind or that self-image, you're unmovable or unshakable on that state of mind. And that state of mind represents love and these attributes, which are aspects of the love and what we talked about in the last videos. Then others will externalize it because it is who they truly are as well. He says at this level of development, the capacity to discern essence becomes predominant. The core of an issue becomes the center of focus. So you've probably heard me say this in some of my earlier videos, and I haven't brought it up in a while, but focusing on what is right rather than who is right, discernment, accurate thinking, accurate interpretation. Accurate thinking and accurate interpretation is from the perspective of love. As Neville has stated before in one of his lectures, he said, any idea that doesn't spontaneously bring forth the feeling of love out of our heart is not a true idea of God. He also says, the prophet said, be ye imitators of God as dear children. How would I imitate God? Well, we are told that God calls things that are not seen as though they were seen, and the unseen becomes seen. So we are representing people in our mind's eye through our inner conversation, inner dialogue, in the consciousness, in our consciousness. That's what we can accurately interpret, our own consciousness. And from there, we're expanding outwards, externalizing others from our consciousness by representing what he says here, be ye imitators of God as dear children, which is what he's referring to right here, is calling things that are not seen as though they were seen, and the unseen becomes seen. Now, this is referred to as speaking the truth, living the truth, embodying the truth, and all of those are attributes of love. So to conclude, and to further affirm our discussion, in grand summary, it's about changing the concept of self, and the concept of self in relation to how we believe others to be from a place of love, in which others automatically represented because that's who they truly are as well. And we get better at it each day. And while we can learn the tactical what to say and how to communicate and other elements like that, it's very important to build it on a foundation, a solid foundation, the central rock of love, which represents the true self-image, the true identity. So any idea that you have of yourself, that you see yourself becoming, that brings forth love, you feel it, it's going to be easier to affirm that because it represents who you truly are. And this is the journey of self-realization. And to conclude, he says, we are told that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. But do we know that man's thinking follows the tracks laid down in his own inner conversation? So we can observe what we're thinking and our inner dialogue all day long, because that is the revelation of the current self-image. And we want to adjust that inner conversation about ourselves and others to a higher degree of relationship to the ideal self-image. As he states here, to turn the tracks to which he is tied in the direction in which he wants to go, he must put off his former conversation, which is called in the Bible the old man, and be renewed in the spirit of his mind. Being renewed in the spirit of the mind can be simply understood as selecting that self-image identity and living in and from that. That will begin the new conversation and will put off the former conversation. And that true self-image, the ideal self-image, the ideal image that represents the vision, that which you desire to bring forth, is one of love. So it's going to be easier to commit to it because it's easier to commit to that which we love. Now he says, speech is the image of mind. So reflect upon that for a moment. Speech is the image of mind. The contents of consciousness can be revealed through speech, which also represents an image of mind. Therefore, to change his mind, he must first change his speech. By speech, it's meant those mental conversations we carry on with ourselves. So the idea is, what are we assuming? What is our inner dialogue? What are we consciously and subconsciously affirming about how we relate to others? That is what is being revealed here as what will potentially externalize in the outer world as the theater with others. And degree of self-persuasion means inner conversations that are mindful and in harmony and in contribution to the ideal self-image. Whatever it is that you choose to desire to see brought forth, how you choose to live, is represented by your inner conversations. And the way we relate to others and how we believe others to be, how we assume to be, is also represented by the contents of our consciousness and the image which can be understood by our inner speech. If you want to copy this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.